ESPN is driven by Brown and Crouppen Law Firm. It's time for the First Community Credit Union Blues postgame show.
Presented by Scott Lee Heating Company and Urban Chestnut Brewing Company on 101 ESPN.
The final score as the Blues fall to the Boston Bruins this evening. They suffer their 19th loss of the season, 12th in regulation, 7 in overtime or a shootout as the Blues' struggles continue. Welcome, everyone, into our fourth period. Extended post-game coverage here on your home for the Blues 101 ESPN. Along with our producer, Jordan Deacon, I'm Alex Ferrario. Lots to do on this one. We're going to hear from Jim Montgomery in our next segment. We're also going to play a cut for you from our reporter's notebook for Fluto Shinzawa, who is the insider for the Athletic, and I thought he had a really interesting quote about what Boston has done defensively this year and how I can tie it in to St. Louis. So we'll touch on that. We'll have our final look. All of it over on our YouTube channel at 101 ESPN STL. You can join in on the conversation over there. You can also text me 314-399-9646. Before we do all that, let's get right into our takeaways.
It's time for tonight's 3 takeaways.
Let it snow.
Presented by Ted Drew's Christmas Trees, where tradition tastes great and the holidays feel right at home.
First takeaway for me is just the offense in general. I know they had 39 shots on goal. To me, I don't know how much I not buy into that. That's not a fair thing to say. I don't know how much I can look at that and say, oh, okay, Blues have solved something. Sure, they had a lot of guys that shot, but the Boston Bruins, fourth best, or fourth worst, I guess I should put it, in the National Hockey League in terms of shots allowed on goal this season. The only ones that have been worse than them are Columbus, Toronto, and San Jose. So this is a team that gives up scoring opportunities. It's just essentially they give up those opportunities. They either outscore those opportunities or their goaltender comes up with some big saves for them with Swayman or Corpus like they got tonight. But on top of that, you know, it's still a lot of perimeter hockey. You know, I think what Joe said is actually a little bit better way to frame it. It just wasn't hard enough. You know, we played some audio in pregame of Jim Montgomery talking about what he wants from his offense. And he said, you know, I want our guys to look like Jake Neighbors and Oscar Sundqvist's face. And for those that don't know, they got black eyes, they got missing teeth, and got welts all over their face because that's how hard they play in the offensive defensive zone. And Jim Montgomery has said that. He has talked about wanting more presence in front of the net. He wants more shots from the blue line, which tonight they got 5 shots on goal from Philip Broberg. You had 2 shots from Cam Fowler. You had 3 shots from Logan Mailloux. You had 2 shots from Colton Parayko. You had 2 shots from Justin Falk. Like, you got shots from your defense tonight, but I don't know if you caused as much traffic in front of Korpisalo as Jim Montgomery has talked enough about. And that really where this is at. You're getting into the zone, you're taking your chances, but, man, look at the way that Pius Suter goal was scored. Pius Suter was standing in front while Holloway and Kyrou fought for the loose puck. They got it. Holloway was just a man on a mission. He forced that turnover that Kyrou picked up. Kyrou rims it around, puts it on net, and then Holloway retrieves it, gets it right to Pius Suter, who's standing in front of the net. That is the recipe of what Jim Montgomery has talked about. Pavel Buchnevich's goal. That's your defenseman chipping in, going in to retrieve the puck. Forecheck from Kaskavaki and Dvorsky squeezes the puck loose. They pressure the turnover. Parayko gets it. Pavel Buchnevic in front of the net. They just weren't doing enough of that tonight, and they didn't really get it from that top line as we saw Jim Montgomery juggle that up a little bit. You know, he put Joseph up there at times because Joseph was playing some speedy hockey, but second takeaway, I don't know how much to read into this, but I'll put this in the takeaway. Robert Thomas played 14-28 tonight. Now, the reason I'm hesitant to make any bigger deal about this is because he did miss skate yesterday. It was a maintenance day, according to Jim Montgomery. He didn't skate. It was an optional the day prior to that, so don't know if he skated on that one. And then today, obviously, he was out there for morning skate. But If it's a maintenance day, then I get it. Maybe there's some struggles in terms of injuries that he's battling through, and they don't want to waste it because it was 5-1 in the third period by the time that started. But I do find it pretty interesting that he took the first 4 shifts of that third period. In those first 4 shifts in that third period, the team was already down 5-1. And then at some point, Jim Montgomery said, nope, not going to do this anymore. And then didn't see the ice again. And even at the end of it, when they drew that power play, he went out there with Kaskamaki and Logan Mailloux and a lot of guys that don't typically see the power play. So that tells you where they were at. But Thomas didn't even see chances on that second unit. So he really did not get off the bench in the final 10 minutes of that hockey game. Finished the night with 2 shots on goal, 2 shot attempts, when 60% of the faceoff dot and had 3 giveaways. So when we hear from Jim Montgomery, it'll be interesting. But, if it's not an injury-related thing, that might have been a tone set or a message sent to Robert Thomas. We've talked about this, the healthy scratch of Jordan Kyrou. Pavel Buchnevich is dipping lower in the line combinations, but this is the first time I think we've talked about Robert Thomas's ice or his minutes being limited. And again, I don't want to make too much of it because it could be injury related, but it also could be performance related. So we'll see what Jim Montgomery have to say about this one. And then the third takeaway for me is, look, the reason 5 goals were scored, because I think the narrative is going to be Jordan Binnington bad again. I'm not going to sit here and say that Jordan Binnington was great. He made some big saves at timely times. But, man, when you go through these goals, I mean, the Steves one, point blank, 2-on-1, one-timer into the back of the net. Morgan Geekie, right in front of the net where they're ultra-aggressive behind the net. Victor Arvidsson's slap shot is one you probably look at, but then Pavel Zacha just basically dances the defense to get into the offensive zone and skates through the middle of the ice and risks the shot, and then the rebound off of the power play from Pavel Zacha. Where I'm getting at with this is, I don't know if this was just the goalie more than it was the team in front of him. Goalie didn't make the saves. I can understand that, but nor did the players make the plays. Like 3 of the Boston goals that were scored started in the offensive zone for St. Louis. The Arvidsson goal, the Steves goal, and the Pavel Zacha goal all started in the corner behind the Boston Bruins goaltender. So that right there is a telling sign that you weren't as aggressive as they wanted the Blues to be, because you lost board battles that resulted in Boston skating through the neutral zone easily and then getting into the offensive zone and either having an odd man rush or being able to create a high-danger scoring chance just with their legs alone. So, Jim Montgomery has talked a lot about how he wants, they switched up this scheme, which you're going to hear Fluto Shinzawa mention this in our soundbite of the night momentarily. But they switched up their scheme defensively. Jim Montgomery talked about this a couple of days ago, to where it's kind of a hybrid of man-to-man and zone, but it's more man-to-man in their own end. And he said a lot of this is because they were having their struggles at zone. They weren't defending well, so they had to change it up. And what man-to-man is it's an onus on every single player to defend their guy. But on top of that, it requires you to be more physical, because you cannot get beat in one-on-one battles. And I think tonight the Blues got beat in a couple of one-on-one battles. And he also noted when he talked about this is it's very close to what he did when he was the coach in the Dallas Stars organization in terms of how he liked to play defense with his group. So, that, to me, is a little bit of a telling. This is the first time in about 8 or 9 games that I feel like I'm talking about the defensive play as a whole. Not defensemen, the defensive play as a whole. Because the forwards weren't doing their job just as much as the defensemen weren't doing their job, and it allows the Boston Bruins to come up with these scoring opportunities. So I teased it. Let's play it here. Fluto Shinzawa, the Athletic Boston Bruins insider, he was our reporter's notebook, and I clipped this from it earlier because it's the soundbite of the night tonight.
The soundbite of the night is presented by Rocket Convenience Stores. Fuel your car and your daily cravings at Rocket Convenience Stores.
It's been a big change in terms of systems. For the first time in a long time, geez, if you even go back to former Bruins coach Julian, now an assistant there. They've always played zone here, always, and it's a hybrid now where there's a lot more puck pursuit in the defensive zone. Like it's not uncommon to see defensemen like Zadorov and McAvoy chasing guys up to the blue line because that's the way Marco wants to play. High in the defensive zone, man-to-man, taking away time, eliminating space. So it's been rocky, especially at the start. It didn't look good, but I think for the most part, and I think they're on their 10th defenseman now tonight in terms of their injuries and going down to the American League. So overall, they've done a nice job of executing what Marco wants to do. So, yeah, I think there's still room to grow in terms of where they want to be defensively. But they're well on their way in terms of what they ultimately want to be doing defensively.
The reason I'm playing this audio is because they made a switch to the style of defense that the Blues made the switch before that Toronto Maple Leafs game that they played on the road in that road trip. They switched, and you heard Fluto say, like, they've always been a zone defense team. And they made the switch with Marco Sturm to going to a man-to-man hybrid defensive play. Well, Jim Montgomery has always been a zone defense up until previously he was with Dallas. When he was in Boston, when he was assistant with the Blues, and now that he's been back with the Blues last season, it was a zone defense. That is now shifted to that man-to-man hybrid defense. Boston has allowed 93 goals this season. 93 goals is the second most given up in the Eastern Conference. And to put it into context, the Blues have given up 100 goals. They had given up 95 prior to tonight, 91 for Boston, a little inflated after this one. But I guess where I'm getting at this is, look, teams have their issues on the defensive side, but I do find it really fascinating that Jim Montgomery, when he was in Boston, zone defense in St. Louis, flipped it to man-to-man. Marco Sturm started this season at zone, flipped it to man-to-man, and now you've got two teams that are trying to kind of get into a consistent flow of how they want to play defensively. Before we take a break, I did want to bring this up because my second takeaway on our Ted Drew's Tree Takeaways was Robert Thomas. Jim Montgomery made it very clear that Robert Thomas was not benched in the third period. He was managing an injury after he missed practice yesterday. So there's the answer for you. It's why I didn't want to go too deep into it. Jim Montgomery not benching Robert Thomas, managing Robert Thomas's minutes. He played 4 shifts in the third. Game was 5-1. At that point, you're not going to go out there and overwhelm a guy who's got a nagging injury. You're going to go play the other guys that were out there on the ice. So Matt DeFrank's the Blues writer for the Post-Dispatch. He's on this road trip, so he just put that one out there on Twitter. We will hear from Jim Montgomery on the other side. We'll get his thoughts on the team's 5-2 loss tonight to Boston, and we'll have our final look as we close things down here on our fourth period here on your home for the Blues, 101 ESPN.
to the First Community Credit Union Blues postgame show.
Presented by Scott Lee Heating Company and Urban Chestnut Brewing Company on 101 ESPN.
5-2 the final score as the Blues fall to the Boston Bruins this evening. You know, I told Jordan Deacon this during the game. I said, I've got a fun game that I want to play. I said, how many games have the Blues lost to backup goaltenders this season? I don't have the stats in front of me from a few years ago, but Grant Francis and I did that in the middle of the season because it felt like the Blues were losing every time they'd play against a goaltender that they had not seen before. And I have to I'm going off of this very raw, but this was like 3 years ago, and I'm almost certain the Blues were like 5 or 6 games below 500 against goalies that they saw for the first time. Surprisingly not as bad as you'd think against backup goaltenders this season. 3-6-1, which means they've only played backup goaltenders 9 times, but 3-6-1 against backup goaltenders still. It's kind of a loose definition of backup goaltenders because the NHL, there's no more backup goalies that are bad. It's backup goalies who, have been number ones before, and now they're just used 30 games rather than 42 games. So, but still, 3-6-1 against the backup goaltenders, which the Blues, of course, have not won a whole lot. But what that also tells me is they've picked up, because they have, they've got a total of 9 wins this season. That means they've beaten number one goaltenders 6 times this season, which seems crazy to say considering the struggles that the Blues have had overall this season. But with those struggles, let's hear what Jim Montgomery had to say following his team's 5-2 loss to the Boston Bruins.
It's time to hear from the head coach, Jim Montgomery, presented by Fisher Window and Door Store, offering quality American-made Marvin windows and doors. Visit their showrooms in Brentwood or East Alton, Illinois.
Poor reloads, poor gaps. I think Jordan Binnington was one of our better players tonight. It wasn't for him, it could have been a lot worse.
Did see Thomas the last 10 minutes.
This game was out of hand, so there was no need to play him. Wasn't a benching. Was not a benching.
Was it just dealing with whatever he was dealing with?
Yeah, he didn't skate the last 2 days, so let's just continue to rest it.
I mean, when you talk about the bad reloads, bad gaps, is that a simple thing to fix, you see?
Yeah, it's an effort thing. It's a simple thing to fix.
The effort, we've been talking about that for probably about a month now, the effort, desperation. Yep. Just how does that happen?
It's a good, I don't have to look at the film to have a better answer for you. But I know it starts with, from within, from everybody.
Are you surprised it's taken this long to still be wanting more in that department?
Yes.
There you go. That's Jim Montgomery. Frustrated. I mean, I think you all could hear the audible sighs in between Matt DeFrank's questions because it's the same topics that are being brought up. Fight, aggressiveness, puck battles, effort, all of those things. Jim Montgomery's not seeing it. What's crazy about it is, what's so confusing about this team is you'll see it and then gone. You'll see it, gone. That's the wild part about where this team is at right now. And Jim was even asked pregame, are you surprised at the struggles? Or I think the way he was asked was, how do you compare the struggles of the Blues versus the Bruins? And he said the Bruins was explainable. He said we lost a lot of faces. I think he said it was 30 or 40% roster turnover. And remember that offseason, they lost Bergeron. They lost Krejci. I think they lost a couple of other pretty impactful players. And the Blues, it's like, we didn't lose anybody. We lost Ryan Suter and we lost Radek Faksa. But we gained Pius Suter, who has 7 goals this season, and we gained Nick Bjugstad, who's got 4 goals this season. So It's funny. Before we get to our final look, I was messaged by somebody earlier on X that said, Alex, does this game join your worst game of the season so far list? First of all, I didn't know that I had that list going on, but I probably have said that multiple times of, hey, this is one of those brutal losses. So I went back and I looked through it, and I was like, all right, let's try and put this into comparison to how some of these games have ended for the Blues this season. So the first one, in my opinion, is still going to be the Washington Capitals. That game felt like there was just nothing from a team that really was in a desperation spot. The next one I put on there was the Red Wings, that they were up 4-0 and lost 6-4, where they gave up. Although they were up by 4, then they gave up the next 5 goals. Third on that list was the Kraken. I think we all can agree that Kraken one, where they had the lead and then they had a 2-goal lead and then lost it and then lost in overtime. You had the Flyers goal, or the Flyers game, the one that they were leading on home ice multiple times, and then they coughed it up in the third and lost in a shootout. I put the Bruins, though, at 5. I put it above the Rangers and I put it above the Ducks because of what Jim Montgomery just said there. It's the same topics that we're talking about. And yes, you had a ton of shots on goal, but whack-a-mole, right? Joey and I talked about this. It's whack-a-mole. The last couple of games has been, well, you're not producing offense, you're not producing shots. Yes, you only got 2 goals, but you did put 39 shots on goal. What happened? Boom, whack-a-mole. Your defense struggles. And he said poor reloads and poor puck management. So that just seems to be kind of where it's at right now for the Blues. So before we close it down, let's hit our final look tonight.
It's time to take a look back at tonight's game with the final look.
Driven by Pure Performance. Only stop for all your aftermarket vehicle needs.
Just to reiterate what Jim Montgomery said, the Robert Thomas thing that I brought up, to where he only did not play the final 10 minutes of this hockey game. It had nothing to do with benching. This was all about Robert Thomas's injury that he's been dealing with. He was a maintenance day yesterday, didn't skate at the optional a couple of days ago. They were managing him, making sure it's not going to get worse in a game that was already 5-1 at the start of that third period. He took a couple of shifts, and then they said, nope, not even dealing with this anymore. Robert Thomas, you just sit. But look, everything that we've discussed, it just kind of feels like Groundhog's Day, right? Where we do this and it's the same story. The Blues just don't have that aggressiveness that Jim Montgomery is wanting to see. Why have the Boston Bruins played better hockey this season after being one of the bottom 5 teams in the NHL this past season? Why are they sitting at 32 points, good for second place in the Atlantic Division, compared to the Blues being at 25 points and sitting, first of all, I mean, the Western Conference and Central Division itself is absurd, because 32 points by the Bruins would be good for second place in the Pacific. It would be good for a wild card if they were a Central Division team. Goes to show you how difficult this wild card in the Central Division is right now in the Western Conference. But why are they playing better? I think it's pretty evident. I mean, the players have bought into what Marco Sturm has tried to tell them to play. Physicality, win board battles, win puck battles, go to the front of the net. That's how they scored their goals tonight. Went to the front of the net, they beat Blues players on loose pucks, and they were quick through the neutral zone. And I don't want this to be misconstrued as, the Blues got a coaching problem, because Montgomery's not going anywhere. I think we all know that. But why Boston has had success and why the Blues have had their inconsistencies, for some reason the players aren't wanting to enact the style that Jim Montgomery is asking them to. Maybe, this is easier for me to talk about on the radio than it is to play the game. I'm not out there, but, Jim Montgomery has said, getting to the front of the net, battling for loose pucks, having that aggressiveness, having that desperation. Boston had that tonight, and the Blues have not had it. The Blues have had it at times this season. I'm not saying that for 28 games the Blues have lacked all of those elements. They've shown it. They just haven't shown it consistently, which is kind of the problem, to where they've got some guys pulling on the rope, some guys not pulling on the rope, and all of that turns into the Blues having their ups and downs and whack-a-mole games in certain outings like they had tonight against the Boston Bruins. So they'll see if they can right the ship when they get back-to-back games Saturday, Sunday. They will take on the Ottawa Senators Saturday evening, a 6 o'clock puck drop with a 5:30 pregame skate, 5 o'clock here on your home for the Blues 101 ESPN. And then on Sunday, they'll do the same against the Montreal Canadiens, 6 o'clock puck drop with a 5 o'clock pregame show right here on your home for the Blues 101 ESPN. Huge shout out once again to our producer, Jordan Deacon, doing a phenomenal job this evening. Once again, I'm Alex Ferrario. Hope everyone has a great rest of their evening. Blues fall to the Boston Bruins tonight, 5-2, suffer their 17th overall loss this season, and they'll see if they can get back in the win column, snap a 2-game losing skid on Saturday against Ottawa, and you'll hear it right here on the St. Louis Blues home 101 ESPN.
Thanks for listening to the First Community Credit Union Blues postgame show.
Presented by Scott Lee Heating Company and Urban